Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there was some good news last summer from Hurricane Ida, and that was that no levees were topped. This week we learned that with a slight shift to the east, it could have been different. And the discussion continues about a freshwater diversion project for Lake Maurepas and its financial implications. A study by Public Radio looks at the issue of extending Medicaid past the birth delivery date. Legislators are pondering that issue. And as preparations are being made for the annual French Quarter Festival, the neighborhood lost one of its most famous residents. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources, Mark SCHLEIFSTEIN, environmental reporter, the TIMES-PICAYUNE, the New Orleans Advocate, SHALINA, CHATLANI, reporter, WWNO Radio, Gulf States Newsroom, and Eric Paulson, news anchor and reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. Let's go on over to Mark first. And we got news this week of a report that took a look at the path of Hurricane Ida and concluded that if it had shifted just a little bit more to the east, that maybe some of the levees on the West Bank, right, would have overtopped?
Right. This is a process that the National Hurricane Center goes through every year. When a hurricane is gone over the next couple of months, they take a look back at how good their forecasting was, what the damages were, all the different little pieces of the storm. And in this particular instance, on the very last page of the report, the Hurricane Center published a map that showed the potential if the storm had come in 15 miles to the east, that storm path would have had a difference in terms of the storm surge, and there might very well have been some overtopping of levees, including a significant portion of the levees along the west bank of the Mississippi River in Plaquemines Parish. That's the most obvious ones. And then a little bit possible in the West Bank and vicinity levees, which are New Orleans and Jefferson Parish mostly, and then possibly some significant overtopping in the La Rose to Golden Meadow levee in Lafourche Parish, which just barely missed being overtopped by the storm itself. And the purpose of this is largely part of the National Hurricane Center's efforts to get people to understand that just a slight wiggle in where the storm can go can make some significant differences, and the public should be aware of that and recognize that their risk is such that they should listen to emergency managers when they say to get the heck out. And this was a good example of that. They had done the same thing with Hurricane Laura last year, where their prediction was that before the storm came in, that there was going to be 20 feet of storm surge. That storm actually came in 20 miles to the east of where it was predicted to go, and so it was only 10 feet of storm surge up the Calcasieu River, but where it did go, there was 20 feet. So they're trying to show that this is a real problem that the public needs to understand.
But Mark, even if it would have topped, it wouldn't have been a Hurricane Katrina type catastrophe or a Lake Charles type disaster.
Right. There's two reasons for that. The first one is that on this particular path, the storm surge would not have been as significant as if the storm had come in from the eastern side of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's number one. Secondly, the levees on the West Bank that are there today are mostly post-Katrina. There were no levees there prior to Katrina, so it would have been much, much worse. And thirdly, the Corps of Engineers has designed its new levees post-Katrina to withstand overtopping. So unlike what happened during Hurricane Katrina in St. Bernard Parish, where once the water overtopped the levees just disappeared. That wouldn't happen this time. They're made of quality material, and or the concrete material is properly designed. At least they're hoping that it has been, and will stay in place. So there would be some interior flooding, and again, we don't know what pieces of the levee might actually have been overtopped or how long that overtopping would have lasted. A worst case scenario for a Category 5, the National Hurricane Center Actually, the Army Corps of Engineers in the past has predicted as much as 5 feet of water inside the levee system for much of the New Orleans metropolitan area.
And Mark, we heard from a lot of officials after Ida that the levee system held, it was tested. It was not tested to its full extent because, as you said, if it had gone a little more east, we'd have been in a lot of trouble.
That's very true. But it was a good test of the way things worked. It was a little bit better than during Hurricane Gustav in 2008 because the system really now is just about complete. But yeah, and the problem is that there's still a big one out there that's worst case. You know, remember these levees are designed for a 1% event, which is, you know, they call what I call the so-called 100-year storm, which has a chance of occurring once, has a 26% chance of occurring once in the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage. And the reality is that Katrina was a 250-year storm in St. Bernard Parish and a 150-year storm in Lake Pontchartrain, bigger than the new levee system is designed to withstand from. So there will be some overtopping in future storms, more likely.
And predictions are we're going to see another bad hurricane season, higher than normal, and we could have 4 or 5, you know, hurricanes.
Colorado State came out with their prediction yesterday, and it's calling for 19 named storms, 4 major hurricanes. So that's, you know, yet again another active year. The reason for that is we're in a La Nina situation. Warm water in the Pacific Ocean means less winds that break up storms in the Atlantic. And if La Nina stays throughout the year, even if it doesn't stay throughout the year, it won't switch to El Nino, which creates more winds that breaks up storms anytime this year.
Real quick, remind us, what was the storm surge for Ida?
I'm sorry?
The storm surge for Ida, what was it?
It depends. It was about 8 feet, which was enough to overtop all the levees around Lafitte.
Okay. All right, Mark, thanks a lot. Shalina, let's go on over to you. And you've been looking into an issue about Medicaid for women, for pregnant women, and postpartum beyond Medicaid. And there was an effort in some states to extend that Medicaid coverage, but it didn't always work.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of an overview about this issue. So in every state, even ones that didn't expand Medicaid like Louisiana, women, when they become pregnant, are eligible to get Medicaid coverage. The problem is that after 2 months after women get birth, they're kicked off of Medicaid. And there's a great deal of data that shows that most people who are pregnant experience pregnancy-related complications up to a year after birth. In fact, in the United States, around 700 women die every year from pregnancy-related complications. These are things like dangerously high blood pressure, called preeclampsia, everything to needing things like mental health for postpartum depression. And in the Gulf South in particular, we have some of the highest maternal mortality rates in the nation. To give some context, that's across all of these states, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, the maternal death rate is about 30 or more per 100,000 live births. And the national average is about 20 per 100,000. So there's been an effort, to expand from that 2-month period, which is just not enough for many women who might experience complications way later after they give birth, to a full year. So Louisiana decided to do this by taking up a new option in the American Rescue Plan that essentially allows them to submit a resolution to Medicaid services to ask them to amend Medicaid so that people who are pregnant can get this option. Now in Alabama, they decided to have an effort to get it funded through the state budget. And there was overwhelming bipartisan support to do this. And it happened. The governor signed that budget a couple days ago. So what happened in Mississippi was that there was also overwhelming bipartisan support to get this done. It passed through the Senate in Mississippi. It even passed through the House Medicaid committee. And then when it came to the House to be voted upon, the Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, decided to shut it down completely without even hearing it for discussion. He allowed it to die on calendar. There was a resolution to bring it back up again, and again it died on calendar. And this was, really heartbreaking for a lot of people in Mississippi that have been fighting for this really life-saving healthcare coverage for tens of thousands of women in Mississippi who give birth on Medicaid. And it's more than 60% of women in Mississippi and in Louisiana give birth on Medicaid. So it's a very vital resource.
And so Mississippi and Alabama, too, did not do the Medicaid expansion as Louisiana did when John Bel Edwards first took office.
Exactly. So what that means is that, so under Medicaid expansion, adults, essentially, adults who fall within a certain income limit are eligible to be put on Medicaid. Whereas in Mississippi and Alabama, that's not the case. You have to be a child or you have to have a family. And even if you do have a family, the requirements for being put on Medicaid are still pretty stringent. So that means that many of the women, who rely on postpartum Medicaid now don't really have another option to get healthcare coverage, because oftentimes when you do get pregnant, you fall into a healthcare coverage gap. You might be between jobs and you might not have insurance through your employer, or, it could be other conditions. So what it means in Louisiana, which took this extra step, is there's actually now over 10,000 women who can stay on Medicaid who still meet an income limit. They still get to have their Medicaid coverage. And so it just is creating a lot more opportunities for people who get pregnant to make sure that they stay safe and healthy.
But in Mississippi, that's not the case for right now. That just is not,
That's
that went nowhere.
The case. It went nowhere. And one thing that I will add that was actually quite interesting about this discussion in Mississippi, this particular legislative session, and that will have ripple effects in states like Louisiana and all around the world and all around the country, is that Mississippi right now is actually spearheading a significant anti-abortion case, Dobbs versus Women's Health Center, in the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And this is a case that could overturn Roe v. Wade. Mississippi passed a very restrictive abortion ban after 15 weeks of pregnancy in 2018, and it immediately went to Supreme Court. And once the court decides on this case, if they, and many experts say that they will overturn Roe v. Wade, it would mean that approximately, some estimates show 26 states could have these trigger abortion bans put in place. It's all very interesting, and there's some, contradictions within the Republican Party among leaders that say you can't, argue for the right to life on one side and then not argue for Medicaid expansion for mothers and babies once they get here. So there's a lot of fighting happening within the Republican Party right now, even when it comes to their pro-life agenda.
All right. Thanks a lot, Shalina. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's go on over to Eric right now. And we learned this week of the passing of Chris Owens, wonderful Chris Owens.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. On Tuesday, Chris died of a heart attack. She had been a little frail over the past several months or so, and when I got the call on Tuesday from her friend and publicist Kitsy Adams, it was heartbreaking, because when a couple of years ago, before Katrina hit, I'm sorry, before Katrina, mm-hmm. Before COVID hit, her longtime boyfriend Mark, who had ridden in her Easter parade with her for years, passed away. And at the funeral, she asked if I would stand in for Mark at the Easter parade, and I said I would be honored to. Then COVID hit, so it got put off. And then we were getting ready to do it this year, and I was going to ride with her, and then she passed away. But the parade will still go on, and that's what Chris wanted. One of her last wishes was, no matter what happens, she wants that Easter parade to go on, and it will.
Of course, Chris Owens and her first husband, her late husband, Saul Owens, they started that club back, gosh, when was that? I mean, so many decades ago on Bourbon Street.
They did. They first started on at the 809 Club, which mm-hmm. is on the other side of Bourbon, where her club is now. And then I think they bought the club where they are now in the 60s. And it's got the club, her beautiful, massive home. There's 20 apartments there and some storefronts. But I mean, it's a very valuable piece of property. But we've got some video of when Chris was there. Her club was fun, and I used to tell people, if you haven't been to a Chris Owens show, you're really not a New Orleanian. It was so New Orleans, and she was fun. Chris put on a fun show, and she was ageless. She went on. I don't know how old she is there, how old this video is, but she could outdance most 20-year-olds. And it's funny because I first met Chris in 1980. I was doing a show called PM Magazine, and I was in my 20s, and I was just kind of in awe of her. And then I remembered when I was 13 years old, and there was Mark and Chris in their Easter parade. But when I was 13-year-old, I came down here on a field trip with my school from St. Louis, and I'm walking on Bourbon Street, and I see this window with this beautiful woman, and I'm going, I'm a 13-year-old boy. I'm going, whoa! and then a few years later in my 20s, I'm in her living room interviewing her. I think I interviewed her about a year after her husband Saul died.
But you know, Eric, it's a bit sad, I guess, but whenever the subject was Chris Owens, the first question was always, how old is she? I mean, that question followed her everywhere.
And I've never said what her age is or what I think her age is. You know, to me, she is ageless. And she didn't, you know, age is a number, and she said hers was unlisted, so.
And then, you know, she was a great entertainer, but also, by all accounts, a really, really good person, very, very nice individual.
Oh, just the sweetest person. And a lot of people don't realize just how much she did for the quarter. Former Councilwoman Jackie Clarkson called me after Chris died, and she said, I just want people to know how much she did for the quarter. Jackie, of course, was the council person for that district for years. And she said, you know, Chris did it without notoriety. She just did so much for the French Quarter. And she did so many things, so many, you know, events for charities, things like that. She was just a wonderful person.
So speaking of the French Quarter, we're just a couple of weeks away from French Quarter Festival after not having it for the past couple of years. And E, I know you wanted to talk over along with Eric too. I mean, how's the quarter doing these days? E,
Well,
let's go to you.
People always say that the quarter is not what it used to be, but it's never been what it used to be. I mean, it's a living neighborhood. And if it was always what it used to be, it would be like Colonial Williamsburg, where we'd have hired actors going around wearing period costumes. And so we need to remember that there's a real synergy into the French Quarter. Now, there are times when I've seen it worse. Last night, I was in the quarter, and then I was surprised. It was packed, and I couldn't figure out why. You know, there was no big game in town.
No.
You know, it wasn't a weekend. Nothing really big, but there were a lot of people and a lot of activity. There are some places, there's always been some places that look a little sleazy, and you kind of wish maybe they'd go away. Some of the T-shirt shops have always been a problem. But you also have Galatoirs and the Modillon Hotel and the antique shops. And so there's still a lot of elegance to the French Quarter also. And so it's had that good mix to it all the time.
And there are things that have changed about the quarter. I talked to a couple of restaurateurs who are friends of mine, and they said the quarter is back. It's doing great. The only problem they're having is some of the roads are still torn up, but that's all in New Orleans. And staffing. Staffing is the problem, but the numbers have been really good. Last week with the Final Four, it was incredible. Hotels had a great run, but things are doing very well in the quarter.
How about the cleanliness of the quarter? Remember, you know, the days of the lemony smell in the French Quarter. I mean, is it still there?
No, it's not like that. But you know, that's when Sidney Torres was doing the quarter, and you know, I mean, all the quarter people were just so thrilled the way the quarter was cleaned up all the time. And you know, Errol was just talking about, you know, it's not like it used to be, and nothing ever is. But when I got here in the late '70s. The quarter was still a neighborhood. It was a wholly different place, you know, and then there was Bourbon Street. And Bourbon Street was a different place then. And then it evolved over the years. You know, you don't have the Al Hertz, the Pete Fountains, and people like that anymore. It's a different place, but it's still the French Quarter. It's still the hub of tourism in New Orleans.
It's not the Jazz Center I think people wanted it to be. A long time ago, there was this incident when, remember, David Brinkley had a series on NBC, and he did a thing about the French Quarter, and he says, there's no jazz in the French Quarter anymore. What there are striptease shows. And that kind of started a little bit of a revival, that people started saying, we need to bring more jazz. And I think that led to the opening of the Preservation Hall. Yeah. And then there's still a Palm Court Cafe in the French Quarter. So there is jazz. I don't know if it was nothing but jazz, if it was Selba's there. But the other thing that's interesting is across the street on the other side where you have Marigny and you have the whole Frenchman Street growing right there. And I don't think there was ever anything the equivalent of that so near the quarter. So that's like a whole nother entertainment district that's growing near there. Yeah. And I assume over time it's gonna help it.
Well, and for a while, the Marigny on Frenchman Street and stuff like that, that was kind of the place where a lot of locals would go because it was not on Bourbon Street. It wasn't the tourist place. But now it's evolved into a big tourism attraction, and so it's evolving as well, just like Bourbon Street did.
So the French Quarter Festival is the weekend after Easter Sunday, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so, and that is the weekend right before the first weekend of Jazz Fest. Right. Is that correct? So, because usually there's a space in between, but I guess it just didn't work out in the calendar for them this year.
Well, the Punchstool Strawberry Festival is this weekend, and sometimes the French Quarter Fest would be in competition with that. The French Quarter Fest has moved it back a little, so that's a good thing. And we have so much stuff going on. You've got the Easter Parade coming up this Sunday, the Chris Owens Easter Parade, which will be a tribute to Chris. There's the Gay Easter Parade. Then, we go to the next weekend. We have French Quarter Festival. Then you have the Jazz Fest.
Two weekends of Jazz Fest.
It's kind of amazing. And you'll see the quarter, music venues, and all kinds of places just packed with great acts. I mean, it's a great time for music lovers.
And much awaited after having these couple of years where we couldn't have anything. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Errol. Let's go back. I'm Errol. Well, Errol and Eric, both of the
well,
E's.
We look so much alike,
Both of the E's. Okay, Mark, let's wrap up with you. And it's kind of complicated, but a Lake Maurepas diversion has gotten the whole, well, you explain it. I can't really explain.
It is rather complicated. So the Corps of Engineers is building the West Shore Lake Pontchartrain levee, hurricane levee, to protect Laplace from repeat flooding, which it had last year and did during Hurricane Isaac in 2012. To build that levee, it's got to go through a lot of wetlands, and so the state has to mitigate those damages. And the Corps had originally proposed a bunch of different projects, and the state said, no, we've got this diversion of Mississippi River water into the Maurepas Swamp, and we'd like to use that. And the Corps originally turned it down because that project cost $200 million, and that's much more than what at the time the Corps said it would be required for mitigation. And the state said, no, we just want the amount of mitigation. Give us credit for that amount of the project. We're building the project anyway. It only makes sense. Some companies that own private mitigation banks have objected to that, but the Corps went ahead and said, okay, we're going to consider that and put out an environmental impact statement in which it said, yeah, we think this will work. And then last week it had to pull that environmental impact statement because of an error that it said it made in the wording, in which it basically said that the state had stopped the permitting process for the diversion a couple of years ago. And the problem is that what had happened was that the state doesn't need that, need separate permits for the diversion if it is included in the levee project as all part of a Corps project. And so the Corps has to rewrite that portion of this plan, and it's expected to get that back out on the street in a couple of weeks. You'll have another public comment period of 45 days, and then the state will move forward with what it plans to do. But meanwhile, the levee itself is already under construction, and the plan is for the diversion to be completed by the time the levee is completed, which is about 2025.
2025. Yeah. And so the levees, explain to us, these levees are going to be protecting what areas? Exactly?
So the levee is going to protect parts of St. Charles, St. John the Baptist and St. James parishes on basically in the area around Lake Maurepas to keep surge that comes in from Lake Pontchartrain from getting into that area. And it's another one of these 100-year levees that are aimed at protecting from storm surge.
And you know, over the years we have heard of flooding in that area, so are these people going to be protected now much better when the levees are up?
If the levee gets, when the levee is completed, it will definitely make a significant difference. Yeah.
Okay, and so the Maurepas diversion,
And so the
what's expected with that?
Maurepas diversion will add fresh water from the Mississippi River and the nutrients that are in there, some of which people say is pollution, but in this case they're looking at it as just that, nutrients, to help the cypress tupelo trees begin to regrow along the Maurepas swamp, which in itself will help reduce storm surge, both
That would, yeah.
both around the lake, but further north as well for the Baton Rouge area.
All right, and such a beautiful area over there. Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. All right, guys, other stories. E, let's go over to you.
Well, the one of the headline acts at the Jazz Fest this year was supposed to be Foo Fighters, and they had to cancel because of the death of one of the musicians in it. Today they announced Red Hot Chili Peppers will be taking his place.
All righty, Shalina, over to you.
Well, in terms of future reporting, I'm definitely going to be staying on the abortion case in the Supreme Court and very interested in something called pregnancy crisis centers, which has been supported by a lot of anti-abortion groups as a solution. So definitely looking into those.
All righty, Eric?
Well, this Sunday, Chris Owens' Easter Parade will go on. There'll be a special a tribute and kind of a moment of silence at the beginning of the parade at the Omni Royal. Before we get started at 12:30, I'll be riding on Chris's float with Sammy Steele, who helped Chris get the whole parade started back in the 80s, and Kitsy Adams, who was probably Chris's closest friend.
Okay.
So it'll go on, and ironically, Chris is going to be buried this Sunday, and her parade will go on in her honor the following Sunday, Easter Sunday.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mark?
So the Environmental Protection Agency has begun an investigation into both the State Department of Environmental Quality and Department of Health over allegations that they discriminate against black communities along the Mississippi River in making decisions on chemical plants and other sorts of facilities. And that process will take a couple of months at least to deal with, and is part of a broader effort by EPA to look more closely at things along what the environmental groups call Cancer Alley along the Mississippi River.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and we thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.